Okay, so moving on, I'm going to introduce you to Mark. Having started his professional career as a corporate lawyer, he eventually found his calling in product management, which he's been doing for the past 7 years with a variety of technology companies. His personal manifesto: he loves learning and improving. He will listen to feedback but won't take things personally. He wants to stay true to himself, and he will always try to do, learn, and try again. He loves looking for creative solutions. Earlier this year, Mark published My Product Management Toolkit, which is now on Amazon. And it's a primer on product management, aimed for product managers at the early stages of their career. So anyone that's interested in finding out more about that can find My Product Management Toolkit on Amazon. And apart from his day job at Settled, where he is a product manager, he is part of the Mind the Product team, working closely with organizers of 155 plus product tank meetups across the globe. And you can find out more about that. I'm going to copy paste that link in the YouTube chat. It's www.mindtheproduct.com/product tank. And thank you so much for joining us today, Mark. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, of course. No, really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. You captured most of it in your introduction. I've been a product manager for the last 7 years. I love working on products. I love trying. I love breaking things and then hopefully learning something from things I break. And yeah, that's what I do on a daily basis. I work at a very small startup, early stage in London called Settled. I'm the chief product officer there. And what we do there, which we're not going to touch on in today's talk, but it's really about the marketplace for buyers and sellers, making the process of buying and selling homes, which in the UK is a very painful process, as pain-free as possible. But I think that's enough about me. If it's okay with you, obviously, I'm going to delve into today's talk. Like you said, Angie, I'm happy to take questions, so feel free to drop them in and we'll just weave them in as we go. So just bear with me whilst I'll get my presentation up. I'm going to share my screen.
Perfect.
Bring the presentation up. I just want to double check that you can all see it.
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is really about managing future products. And it's quite funny, I get asked this question quite a lot. People asking me like, what will products of the future look like? And I wish every time people ask me like I had like a crystal ball or was like a clairvoyant and I could predict the future. Unfortunately, I can't. But what I do know one thing, and that's a prediction I'm more than happy to make, which is that artificial intelligence will rule. And that prediction is quite a safe bet, to be honest with you, because it's based on reality. Because artificial intelligence is already here. We'll talk about what that looks like, which products it's in. But if you look at artificial intelligence in its simplest form, as you've heard in your introduction, I'm not an engineer, I'm a product guy, so I know a bit about technology, I know a bit about business, I know a bit about product, I know a bit about everything. So I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. And I see artificial intelligence as the combination of data and algorithms. And effectively, if you take that very basic definition, I see data in itself as something which is pretty dumb, to be honest with you. And the algorithms, the logic that you code effectively, you use that to make sense of that dumb data. So that's just to set the scene a little bit. And for the sake of clarity, that's what I talk about when I talk about artificial intelligence, and we'll explore that a bit more as we go. Because like I said, artificial intelligence is already there, and that's why it's a bit of a cop-out on my behalf to say, well, artificial intelligence will rule in the future, because, it's already quite, it's quite predominant in a lot of products and services without us even knowing about it. To give you a few examples, I don't know if you've come across Google Photos, for instance, where, as long as you give it access to your contact list, it will match people in those pictures with your contacts, basically. So you can automatically share all the pictures that have got those contacts in them in one simple go. Another really good example is Netflix. You might be aware of the fact that Netflix is very good at doing personalized movie recommendations. One of the things that I learned about quite recently, which I didn't know about, which is their ability to show you very specific artwork for the same film, but based on your preferences. So let's take the top one as a good example, which is Good Will Hunting. If it turns out, based on the data that Netflix has on me as a user, that I'm very much into romantic movies, then it will show me the artwork, which you can see in the top row, which shows Matt Damon and Minnie Drive in a very romantic scene, right? Because the idea is that that will appeal to me most based on what I've watched previously. Whereas if you go to the row below that, and Netflix finds out that I've been watching lots of silly comedies, then it might actually show me the artwork for, again, Good Will Hunting, but this time with Robin Williams, the late comedian, in it. Another good example of how artificial intelligence is already prevalent in today's products and services is Uber Eats, and how it can predict the delivery time from the moment you place an order to the moment it gets delivered at your door, and everything in between. And it's interesting when you look at what sits behind that there's a whole data infrastructure that obviously makes that possible. So these are just three simple examples to say that, artificial intelligence is here, it's already in our products and services, and it's here to stay. And in fact, I believe it's going to get bigger and bigger as we go. However, one of the points I will stress tonight is that humans will be needed. Because I will make the point that disaster looms if humans don't feed into artificial intelligence. Give you an example from a few years ago of a bunch of Japanese tourists in Australia, and they wanted to get from Deception Bay to North Stradbroke Island. As you do, they followed their sat nav, which showed them this straight red line from one place to another, and that was the direction that they went in. I'm gonna, keep you on the hook because I'm not gonna tell what happened. I will do that later, but it's a really good example of how we need to not take artificial intelligence in its own right. You need that human input, at least for the foreseeable future. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is, what is artificial intelligence? I've given you a bit of a starting point. We're going to explore that a bit more, and I'm sure there'll be questions around that as well. Then I'll look at artificial intelligence from three very distinctive perspectives. So we'll look at it from a people point of view, we'll look at it from a technology point of view, we'll look at it from a product point of view, and then we'll finish off just talking about what does this all mean for us. And when I say us, I mean not just us as humans, but also us as engineers, as product people, as designers, people involved in building great products. So let's start right at the beginning. What is artificial intelligence? So I looked it up on Wikipedia. It's got a great definition where it says, artificial intelligence is the intelligence of machines and the branch of computer science that aims to create it. AI textbooks define the field as the study and design of intelligent agents, where an intelligent agent is a system that perceives its environment and takes actions that maximizes its chances of success. I don't know, obviously I can't see your faces, but I'd be curious to know whether you've got any thoughts on this definition, because I feel that there's, even though it's right on the money, no doubt, I still feel there's something wrong with this definition. One of the things I thought when I was reading this definition is, like, what would my mom make of this definition? If my mother were to read this definition, what would she think? And I think the thing I struggled with the most was the use of the term intelligent agents. Because that's this idea that, before we know it, we as humans will become completely redundant and the machines will be taking over from us. And I think that is very, very far out, if it ever will be like that. In essence, when I think about artificial intelligence, like I mentioned before, at the end of the day, it's all about data. And to break that down a bit more, there's 5 elements to take into account. So it's obviously about collating the data, organizing the data in such a way that the machine effectively can make sense of it. So that means labeling it, structuring it. Then it's really about recognizing certain patterns within the data. It's then making predictions on the back of that data, predictions of future actions, events, responses, and that's a continuous loop. And that's why as point 5, I mentioned augmenting there, because again, you keep feeding data into that machine so that the data set and the patterns become richer and richer and richer. Another way of looking at it is supervised learning versus unsupervised learning. I can imagine that some of you might already know this, especially if you're an engineer and you work with some of these things, but supervised learning is effectively where the data that you feed into the machine, so to speak, is labeled by humans, whereas with unsupervised learning, that's not the case, and it's almost a machine learning by itself. So now that we've looked at that definition, let's look at it in a bit more detail from 3 different lenses. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna look at technology, we're gonna look at it from a people perspective, and we're gonna look at it from a product perspective. Let's start with technology. And there's a few things I want to cover here. So I want to talk about systematic thinking. I want to talk about the distinction between narrow artificial intelligence versus general artificial intelligence. I'd like to talk a bit more about the processing power that's required for artificial intelligence. And I know web development is something that you guys are looking at, or some of you at least are looking at as part of the program, so I'll touch on that as well. All part of this lens, which is technology. So first of all, systematic thinking. One of the things that, if you think about artificial intelligence, what it's really good at is making sense of the current environment. So if you take the data from the current environment, create the right algorithms, artificial intelligence as an approach, as a system, is very good of making sense of what's happening in the current environment, what's happening in with current data and current actions. And on the back of that, it can make all kinds of accurate predictions. And again, purely based on understanding what's happening currently. Good example that you might have come across as well is Google DeepMind's AlphaGo, which was a artificial intelligence player of the board game called Go. It's a Japanese board game. And that player, the artificial intelligence player, was purely based on data from thousands and thousands of hours of people playing this Japanese board game. So it had a really good understanding of all the different moves that you can play when you're playing that board game. And on the back of that understanding of that data, it could, play the game in its own right. The problem is, especially given where artificial intelligence is at the moment, what happens if there's data or there's events that are not part of the current environment? For instance, going back to the example of the Japanese tourists, you remember they were in Australia, they followed their sat-nav, which says, follow this straight line from Deception Bay, you'll get to North Stradbroke Island. And they did, because that's what you do if you're a tourist. You don't know the area and you follow your sat-nav and you think you trust the data effectively. Well, I'm sure you can guess by now what happened to these tourists. They got stranded. It's a very simple example of a situation where just understanding the current environment wasn't enough. It needed some sort of course correction of human input. The other thing I want to talk about when we talk about the artificial intelligence, because it's obviously very sexy to talk about big data, making sense of the data, making recommendations. The one thing we shouldn't forget is that you need an awful lot of computing power. So processing power is really going to be more and more important if you want to process all the data. There's a law which is called Buck's law, which has come which comes from Ian Buck, who is heads up the Tesla data center unit at NVIDIA. And he effectively says that for every piece of data created, you need like a gigaflop of computing power over its lifetime to maintain that piece of data. So again, it's something that gets forgotten quite easily, because it's obviously much more exciting to talk about the front end of artificial intelligence and all the great things it can and will be able to do. But we do have to bear in mind, again, looking at it from a technology perspective, that some serious computing power is required to keep that going. From a web development point of view, it is very exciting because you can already see there's a much better interactions between different devices, different kind of channels, much more seamless. It's the same between, the voice conversation between the user and web. It all becomes a lot more seamless and a lot more intuitive because of that artificial intelligence that underpins it. And you can see some really good examples, particularly from a mobile point of view, when you go to China and you look at WeChat. It's a messenger app like WhatsApp, for instance, that is really quite advanced in building strong data profiles of its users. So in this example, for instance, if I'm a WeChat user and I'm on WeChat and I'm just looking for places to eat, it will give me very tailored recommendations based on the understanding of me as a person and my tastes when it comes to food, but also my exact location. So I'll get relevant recommendations, very tailored to me as a user, which is super helpful. And the same is with Tiao, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but that's again a Chinese news app which lets you fully personalize the news that you get and that you see. So no landing screen is the same for any user at any given time, because it's only going to show you those articles, those pieces of news and information that you're interested in based on your personal preferences. And again, that's all based on those 5 elements of data that I talked about earlier, just understanding the data, recognizing certain patterns and making predictions on the back of it, and constantly feeding new data in as I continue using this app. So just to summarize that first lens that we applied to artificial intelligence, which is technology, important that we start with human input to feed the machine, so to speak, and we know what happens. We've seen the example of the Japanese tourist. If we don't have some form of human or other kind of course correction, data will drive mobile and web development going forward. But in order to be able to do that and do that successfully and deliver a great customer experience, we do need a lot of processing power in the back end. Let's apply another lens to artificial intelligence, which is people. And I want to come back to the point I made earlier about the fact that humans will be needed. And it's not this idea of the intelligent agents taking over and making us humans completely redundant. Going back to the example of AlphaGo, that Japanese board game where Google DeepMind created an AI player that studied thousands and thousands of hours of people playing the game and took all the data and was, on the back of that data, able to play against a human. Google DeepMind then launched the next version of AlphaGo, and they called it, not very originally or creatively, but they called it AlphaGo Zero. And instead of basing its gameplays on human data, it actually learned by playing against itself. So that is unsupervised learning at its core, effectively. So instead of data being fed into the machine, into AlphaGo, labeled by humans, the machine just learned about playing against itself. And it took a few days and lots of hours of playing, but it worked out how to play the game purely on its own right. So it's a really good example of an AI kind of application, if you like, where you do need that human input to get started, but eventually the machine can train itself. But to get there, you need a lot of data to begin with. Another good example is here in the UK, there's a grocery delivery service called Ocado, and its warehouse is amazing because it's all populated by robots who will pick your groceries, will process your deliveries. It's hardly any humans involved, which is great, especially when it works really well. It's super efficient. Gets a bit tricky though if it messes up, basically. Because artificial intelligence, it's not human, it won't have the same empathy that a human will have. So, take this example where you've got a customer that's really disappointed because the Brussels sprouts that they got as part of their Ocado order, you can barely see those Brussels sprouts with the naked eye, right? And they were understandably quite upset about that. But if I'm a machine and I'm just understanding from the order that you need Brussels sprouts, I'm going to give you Brussels sprouts, irrespective of how big or small those Brussels sprouts are. The other key thing to think about is ethics. Obviously, it's great talking about data, and you can already see from some of the examples I've given earlier, but also if you look at healthcare, that with the help of data and artificial intelligence can do great stuff, but equally there's a lot of opportunity for abuse. And the recent scandal around Facebook and Cambridge Analytica is a great case in point in that respect. So what that does mean is that it puts more emphasis on the importance of ethics and making sure that personal user data, whether it's about me as a person or behavioral data, if you like, doesn't get abused. It's interesting what Google does in this respect, because they've come up with a whole new set of kind of principles, if you like, that they want to stick to, and that underpins their future AI applications, just as an example. So we've talked about people. Just to summarize, we will need human input to train machines, initially anyway. We've seen some examples of how artificial intelligence is great when it comes to personalization, speed. Not so great just yet when it comes to error handling, when something isn't going quite according to plan or what you expected. And then underpinning it all is data management and ethics, which are really, really important, particularly from a people perspective. Let's look at the third and final lens that I wanted to apply to artificial intelligence, which is all about product. And like I said before, it is here. We've looked at data, we've looked at artificial intelligence. It's all here, and it's here to stay. What it means from a, I guess, pure product lifecycle perspective, that previously, and I can imagine that you might have seen this bell curve before, products would follow a certain life cycle. So take its time, you'd have a slow kind of introduction phase where you have your early adopters, then it would take a while to get to maturity, effectively for the product to become mainstream before it then goes into decline, and you might decide to completely terminate the product or replace it with something else. Now, I believe that with the introduction of products that are purely based on data, the product lifecycle is going to look a bit more like this. So it's a bit more like a shark fin, where you've got a very steep curve to get to mainstream adoption, if you like. So not that kind of drawn out bell curve that you can see in gray on this picture here. It's much more kind of up to that peak very quickly. But equally, if someone overtakes you because they've also got data, the decline can just be as rapid. Good example is Google, who collate an awful lot of data based on the things that we do through Google, the things that we search for, us using YouTube today, websites that we visit, things that we click on. It creates an awful lot of data, it generates, I should say, an awful lot of data about us based on the things that we create through Google. Think of, just sending an email through Gmail or creating documents in Google Docs, and equally just data based on my personal information, who I am, where I'm based, how old I am, what my phone number is. So you can see how Google is sitting on a lot of personal and behavioral data. And I believe really strongly, not just based on the present, but also going forward, if you've got the data, then the world is your oyster. And as a company, you can try to really create like a strategic moat, if you like, around your products and your services, which is hard for other competitors to overcome. And that dominance, if you like, that can take, can come in the form of a very familiar interface. Spotify is a really good example where you can tell, looking at their interface, that they sit on a lot of data, and their whole play to the market is very much based on personalization, whether it's by the recommendations they make, the playlist that they offer you, the ability to create personal collections. But equally, there will be more and more products with that less familiar interface. Nest is a good example. Sonos smart speakers, which don't have a traditional interface, it's all voice-based, or even trucks of the future, again, which look very different to the lorries that we're used to these days. Again, all based on data, but without that kind of interface that we're used to. Bit similar to what I was saying before in terms of the flip side of data, where, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, quite easy to for personal data to get abused in a really bad way. Same from a product point of view, there is a risk of obviously what they call dark design patterns, that if people use the data, they might not always use that data for good, might be actually they might use it for purposes that are in the interest of the company rather than in the interest of you as a customer or user. A good example is Fitbit, for example, where up to recently they were using personal user and health and fitness data to upsell to other companies without customers knowing about it. It's a really good example of that ethics piece around data. And it's really interesting. There's a lady called Kathy O'Neill who talks about that there are ethical choices we need to make in every algorithm that we build. So going back to the definition that I gave right at the beginning of my talk, where I talked about artificial intelligence equals data and algorithms obviously being the logic to structure the data, to make sense of the data, and to solve problems through the data. She makes the point, and I think she's 100% right, that when we build those algorithms on the back of the data, that we need to think very carefully about some of the ethical choices that we make when creating those algorithms. And she's written a great book about that, which I highly recommend if you want to read more about that kind of the dark side of artificial intelligence and data. And the book is called Weapons of Math Destruction. Highly recommend having a read of that book. So that product lens, just to summarize what we talked about there, data as can be a prime strategic advantage. If you sit on the data, then the world is your oyster, in my view. We've seen some examples already, whether we looked at the lorries, whether we looked at Nest or the Sonos speaker, the interfaces with products will evolve quite radically. And we've also seen that there's a need to respect the user even more. So we've looked at what artificial intelligence is, what it isn't. We looked at narrow artificial intelligence, where it's very good at doing one task and one task only. We looked at general artificial intelligence, where it's almost like it's a human. And we looked at the evolution of AlphaGo, for instance, as an AI player. We've then applied those three different lenses to understand a bit more what artificial intelligence means from a product, a people, and a technology point of view. Now let's look at it, what it means for us. Like I said, not just for us as humans, but particularly for us as engineers, product managers, designers, people building products. First thing that I expect to see more of is this kind of partnership between humans and machines. So rather than thinking we've got these kind of robots taking over completely, and we as humans, we might as well retire and do something else, I think we're a far way off from that happening. I see it much more as a symbiotic partnership, where machines will augment human intelligence, and they will work very closely together rather than just one taking over from the other completely. Second thing that we need to be mindful of is the flip side of data. We talked just now about those ethical choices that we need to consider when creating algorithms. We have to be very careful, as great as it is to be able to use data. There's equally a very thin line by going to the dark side of using that data, or better put, abusing that data. And thirdly, the interface of products, as we know, will change dramatically over the coming years and decades, where products, because data is the main kind of underpinning factor, will come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. So those are the three main takeaways. And if you bring that back, ultimately, it's like with any other product, when you think about artificial intelligence, start with the problem that you want to solve, identify the data that you need and why, and design and build accordingly. Because I believe that if you do that, you'll create great products. You'll make the most of what artificial intelligence has and hasn't got to offer. And you don't have to worry about artificial intelligence and see it as this kind of big, kind of humongous monster and that you need to hide from. There's no, as I said throughout this presentation, there's no hiding from artificial intelligence. It's already there. So you might as well embrace it and really make the most of the opportunities that it offers. Thank you very much.
Yay! Awesome. Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Okay, I am going to share my screen right now. My camera, I mean. Let's see. Okay, and are you able to share yours?
Yes, you should see me now.
Great. Okay, so we have a few questions. How do you use artificial intelligence to make predictions with your personal job?
Yeah, so in my current job, I have to be honest, we're not quite there yet in terms of being able to make predictions. But I'll give you a better example. When I worked in music streaming not that long ago, where we did the classic kind of, basic artificial intelligence, like the Amazons of this world and the Netflixes of this world will do, is to say, if you purchased or listened to this music genre or this album, you might also like this. And it was really good because it also helped us, which I think is relevant for the conversation tonight as well, not just to look at the most popular music, but I find with music and film and any form of content, there's typically few items that are everyone's read the same book or read the same music, but then there's a massive long tail of content that doesn't normally, you don't get exposed to it. And that's what the likes of Netflix and Spotify are really good at, because they understand what you've listened to previously, what you're interested in. They'll pull in that kind of stuff that's typically hidden in the long tail and offer that because they really have a good understanding of your profile and your interests.
Interesting. Cool. Okay, another question we have. Let's see. What do you think about Tesla's self-driving cars?
It's a good question. Again, self-driving cars are here to stay. And Tesla is obviously at the moment, it's it's obviously a bit of a funny story with Elon Musk going slightly off the rails. But if you look at it, just even forgetting about Tesla for a moment, the whole concept of self-driving cars, and again, it's early days. But if you look at the positive aspects, and I appreciate that obviously it's not 100% there yet in terms of technology, in terms of safety, but you can see where it's going, where in a 5-10 years time, we won't be having our own private cars anymore. It will be much more efficient. We'll have a fleet of cars and we'll just only use the car when we need, and we don't have to worry about parking. It becomes a lot more efficient. And Tesla, whatever you think of them and whatever you think of its founder, are making really great strides in that respect, even with the truck that they launched last year. You can see where that's going.
Is Tesla pretty infiltrated into London's universe per se?
Yeah, you see a lot. You see a lot of Teslas on the street. Obviously, it's and I think I don't know what the latest version is, which I know is there's a bit of a backlog where that's supposed to be a slightly more reasonable kind of priced kind of version of the Tesla that you see currently. And I think when that car comes out, Tesla will become a lot more mainstream. Again, this is my prediction. I left my crystal ball at work, but that's what I predict. Basically.
Yeah, I actually saw an article about this new public transportation system that they're trying to come up with, and basically it looks like a what do you call it, where aliens live, the little flying saucer.
Yes, I've seen that as well.
Yeah, with the little rods as legs, and then it's gonna
Imagine.
carve through traffic and take you to your final destination.
Totally. And, obviously that's still far away, and I know people laugh about that because it feels a bit dystopian, which I do get. But the concept of it, the whole idea of, you see, even with Uber or Lyft, transportation as a service, Tesla and the likes do have a massive role in that to play. I really believe that.
Yeah, and even with flying cars, I know they were trying to get that ball starting to roll. So I know in Europe, they're only allowed to test that out here, but not in the States at the moment. So that's going to be another interesting twist
Wow.
on future products.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so another question we have is, what book or books or resources do you recommend to start in the world of artificial intelligence? Thanks. From Jesus. Gracias, Jesus.
Yeah, thank you, Jesus. I need to look at my notes because I came across this great book. So bear with me, because artificial intelligence, there's quite a few books. Obviously, I read the Elon Musk biography as well. But there is one, just bear with me. It's, yes, I found it. It's called AI Superpowers. By a guy called Kai-Fu Lee. But again, I'm sure if you go to any place where books are sold and you type in AI superpowers, because what it focuses on, and this is a guy who's done a lot in the world of artificial intelligence, but he focuses particularly on what's happening in China. And even in his talk today, I gave you 2 examples. And I think they're pretty advanced when it comes to artificial intelligence. So that's definitely one book I would suggest people read if they want to know more, not just even where it's at today, but also about possibilities for the future.
AI superpowers.
Yes.
Great. And here's another one. Do you think robots will take over the world?
Yeah. Like I said, the intelligent agents are coming. We're so far away from that. What I do believe that robots will definitely take over sooner than we think from humans when it comes to very, repetitive kind of mundane tasks. And you see that already. Ocado is quite a good example, that warehouse where they process your grocery delivery orders, and it's quite manual kind of, mundane work. Definitely I can see robots, and you already see that, whether it's assembling cars, putting together. But there's a lot out there where even if you don't think about where human intelligence is required, so robots are quite far away from that at the moment.
Very cool. Also, you mentioned artificial intelligence and ethics influence. So how does that shape you as the chief product officer of your company?
Yeah, that's a good question. It just means generally, and you see that with the introduction of GDPR early this year, where I have to be really sensible with data, even as a small startup where we don't necessarily have all the procedures and the infrastructure in place to have Chinese walls and stuff, but really think carefully about how I use data, who I share it with. We, as a startup, we work with lots of third parties. Be very sensible how I share that information, because again, I need to be even more conscientious with making sure that customers know what they sign up for when they say, yes, I'm happy to share my data or happy to become a customer. And that's, the Fitbit example that I gave, where they got into trouble for sharing that personal user data without users' consent. And I think I can see that already in my startup. And I can only imagine what it's like when you work at a massive organization and you really sit on a lot of customer and behavioral data.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot going on in the world of AI and product management and thinking about the future. Okay,
Absolutely.
another question. How does AI help the medical system right now?
Well, it's interesting because, and I'm obviously not a medical, but there was a project, for instance, here in Cambridge where I think I can't remember what it was, but it was set up based on data where it could very quickly and easily recognize certain kind of cancers. Obviously, that's pretty serious, but based on that data and without doing lots of kind of surgery and stuff, much quicker, it could understand, who was prone to certain cancer. So it could be much quicker in the process, whereas before we just, it'd be diagnosed and it was too late. Whereas now people, because they have much better understanding of what conditions lead to a certain cancer, and I'm not saying cancer has been solved and the world is a better place for it, but definitely in treatment, people can react a lot sooner, can be a lot more proactive.
Mhm. Where did your fascination for artificial intelligence begin? And
Yeah.
how did you start connecting it with product management?
It's more the latter, right? Because I'm just very conscious of the fact that, it's easy to think, oh, we're just, product management, you create either physical product, like I could be a product manager creating a car or a plane, or you create like, a website or an app. And I think it was more about me starting to think, how will products evolve? And really that thought of the interface that I'm working on today is not the interface that I'm likely to be working on tomorrow or in a year's time from now, because it is, even if you think about the Internet of Things is another good example. Again, the interface and the way we interact with technology and data is going to change quite dramatically. You can already see it. I see it with my kids when they use Alexa without even thinking twice about it and give her all kinds of instructions. Do you see what I mean? And that's what got me interested in that whole field of artificial intelligence.
Very cool. Let's see. Another question. Let's see. Which brands or companies do you know that are implementing artificial intelligence into them? And how does that shape the consumer?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned some examples uh, in my talk. Obviously, I mentioned Uber Eats. Uber generally are doing a lot of work around data and how they can use it to give you recommendations. Waze is another really good example, who got acquired by Google a few years ago. It's a navigation system, but you can already see when I use Waze that they start giving me all kinds of recommendations as I'm driving. Talk about, comes back to the ethics point. But that's another good example. In the UK, you've got a delivery company called Deliveroo, similar to Uber Eats, again using data quite a lot. Amazon, at the end of the day, is the example that trumps them all, basically, because they use data for all kinds of things that we don't even know about just yet. That's probably the best example. And yeah, to answer the second part of that question, how will that shape the consumer? Well, I think at the end of the day, it will give the consumer a much better experience. Like some of the examples I gave earlier, I think it will lead to a much more kind of interactive experience, where you don't have to, the points of friction in the forms of an interface will eventually go. Again, going back to voice with all its limitation, but Siri and Alexa, but you can already see how that's changing things, even if it's not optimal yet. And I think it will give you a much more personalized experience. I think that's the other key thing. And also more from a business perspective. And I know that's not part of the question, but I think it will lead to a lot more efficiencies in the way we do things.
Cool. Sorry, we had a little bit of a glitch there. Yeah, in San Francisco, there was this restaurant that we used to go to, and during our lunch break, we would walk in there. You just quickly punch in your order, say what kind of salad you want, what exactly you want in there, what you want removed. You could be very specific with it. And then they create it. It's like little robot machine creates it and then delivers it to you from a little box. And I thought that was so cool.
But yeah, and you can think about it from, all kinds of ways. Going back to the question earlier about healthcare, you can see if I need the same prescription every single month because of my condition, right? Why do I need to call the doctor and ask him to send that prescription and stuff? Why is that not automated, for instance? Really understand, you see a lot even in professional services where, based on the data, insurance companies will tell you when you need to renew, or even price comparison sites will look at the data saying, oh, your insurance policy that you got last year for your car, which actually was quite expensive, is up for renewal. And look at these recommendations that we can give you. Again, sounds less sexy, I know, and less dystopian, but again, that is artificial intelligence. So yeah, it's becoming more and more present. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the last question, are you a supporter of artificial intelligence adoption?
Yes, absolutely. And again, when I say that, it sounds like really like I want to have a robot in my house who makes me breakfast every morning. It's not that, but again, if I bring it down and bring it back to that very core definition of dumb data, but really using it for good and making sense of it and creating a better experience and better outcomes, going back to the healthcare question for customers, yes, 100%.
Yeah, I agree. If you use it for the good of humanity, I think it's got a really great future.
There's loads of opportunities. And again, I'm realistic enough, again, going back to the question about self-driving cars, for instance, that there's still a lot of glitches and it's early days and we have to be really sensible and one step at a time. But I think, the opportunities are endless almost.
Definitely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you for putting together that really awesome, informative presentation. We've had a blast with you, and until next time.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. Really good to be on it and just talk through artificial intelligence with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, goodbye, viewers, and muchas gracias. Ya vamos a terminar. Muchas gracias a Marc para asistir esta noche y presentar sobre Managing Future Products con inteligencia artificial. Hasta pronto. Thank you. Goodbye.